My husband laughed. You really think I'd ever let you meet my rich business friends? He said right in front of his buddies. I don't want you asking them for help. They all laughed. I just smiled and said, don't worry, you won't have to. Then I walked away. That night his best friend sent me a message that made my heart race. I don't want you asking them for help. Grayson's voice carried across the private dining room, loud and deliberate, designed to ensure his colleagues understood exactly what he thought of me. Victoria had just suggested I attend the Partners Summit in the Hamptons, an innocent invitation that triggered something vicious in my husband. He laughed before delivering the insult, that practiced networking laugh that sounded nothing like the man I married 4 years ago. Marcus Brennan shifted uncomfortably in his leather chair. Devin Whitaker studied his wine glass with sudden fascination. Even the server approaching with our entrees executed an awkward retreat, understanding that a private humiliation was unfolding in a very public space. I am Autumn Reeves Caldwell, 32 years old, a graphic designer who spent 3 years supporting a man through his failures only to discover that my reward for loyalty was being treated like a liability he tolerated rather than a partner he valued. Before we continue, thank you for being here to witness stories about dignity, betrayal, and reclaiming your power. If you believe in the strength it takes to walk away from disrespect, please consider subscribing. It truly helps these stories reach others who need them. Now let's see what happens next. The silence that followed felt thick enough to choke on. I sat at the far end of the table in the Ashford Society, an exclusive Manhattan club where the leather chairs cost more than my monthly rent and the annual membership fees exceeded what most people earned in a year. This was Grayson's world now, all polished mahogany and dim lighting designed to make everyone look important and mysterious. I had been placed deliberately at the periphery, close enough to technically be included but distant enough to be forgotten during the actual conversation. Victoria's face had gone pale. She glanced between Grayson and me, clearly regretting her suggestion. Marcus was studying the abstract painting on the wall with sudden intense interest. Devin had found something fascinating about the wine label on the bottle between us. Nobody was looking at me directly, but I could feel their awareness of my presence like heat from a flame. They were embarrassed for me. Worse, they were embarrassed by me. I should have stood up immediately. Should have gathered my dignity and walked out of that dining room without a word. But I remained frozen in my chair, my mind replaying what had just happened, trying to understand how a simple dinner invitation had transformed into public degradation. The black dress I wore suddenly felt too tight. Grayson had specifically requested I wear this one, the simple design I had purchased from Nordstrom Rack 2 years ago. He always mentioned it with a particular edge in his voice, never quite criticism but something adjacent to it. A reminder that I shopped at stores with Rack in the name while his colleagues wore designers whose names I could barely pronounce. I had thought wearing it tonight was compromise, meeting him halfway between my world and his. Now I understood it differently. He had dressed me for this humiliation, chosen the costume for my role as the wife who didn't quite measure up. Victoria attempted to smooth over the moment with forced cheerfulness. Well, the summit is still months away. Plenty of time to decide. Her voice was too bright, too deliberately casual. She was trying to give Grayson an exit ramp, a way to walk back what he had said. But he didn't take it. Autumn has her own projects to focus on, he said, his tone dismissive. She stays busy with her design work. The way he emphasized design work made it sound like a hobby rather than a profession. Something I did to occupy myself while he built a real career. I found my voice finally, though it came out quieter than I intended. I do branding and marketing strategy for small businesses and nonprofits. I directed the comment toward Victoria, refusing to look at Grayson. Helping organizations communicate their mission effectively. Devin glanced up from his wine. That's interesting, he said, though his tone suggested it was anything but. Very charitable of you. Charitable. As if my work was volunteer service rather than paid consulting. As if helping a women's shelter develop their fundraising materials or creating a visual identity for a community health clinic was somehow less valuable than moving money around investment portfolios. Marcus cleared his throat, clearly desperate to change the subject. He launched into a story about a recent acquisition, something involving a tech startup and a bidding war. Grayson engaged immediately, his entire demeanor transforming. The coldness he had directed at me vanished, replaced by animated enthusiasm. He gestured as he spoke, leaning forward with interest, laughing at Marcus's observations. This was the Grayson his colleagues knew. Confident, engaging, successful. The version of himself he never brought home anymore. I watched him perform and realized I was seeing someone I barely recognized. The man I had married 4 years ago had been different. Struggling, yes, but also vulnerable in ways that had made him seem human. He had needed me then. Needed my emotional support through his father's death, my financial support when his second startup collapsed, my unwavering belief that he would eventually find his footing. When we met, I was already established in my freelance career. Not wealthy but stable. I had my Tribeca apartment, a steady roster of clients, and a life I had built carefully over years of hard work. Grayson had moved in after 6 months of dating, initially as a temporary arrangement while he figured out his next steps. His 2 suitcases had somehow expanded to fill every closet. His temporary stay had become permanent. And slowly, methodically, he had transformed my space into something unrecognizable. The vintage concert posters that had lined my living room walls, souvenirs from shows I had attended throughout my 20s, had been the first to go. Grayson said they made the apartment look juvenile, like a college dorm rather than a professional residence. He replaced them with abstract art he claimed was investment grade, pieces that cost thousands of dollars and looked to me like expensive accidents. When I protested, he reminded me that his colleagues might visit, that first impressions mattered in his industry. The colleagues never visited. But the apartment continued to change. My comfortable reading chair, an overstuffed monstrosity I had found at an estate sale and loved deeply, was replaced by a sculptural piece that prioritized form over function. My bookshelves were reorganized by color rather than author, creating a rainbow effect that photographed beautifully but made finding any specific book nearly impossible. The kitchen was overhauled with expensive appliances I never used because Grayson preferred we eat out at restaurants where being seen mattered more than the food. Each change was presented as an improvement, an upgrade, a necessary evolution of our shared space. I told myself this was what compromise looked like, what partnership required. If Grayson needed our home to reflect a certain level of success to feel confident in his career, wasn't that a reasonable request? Wasn't supporting his professional growth part of being a good wife? But our home had stopped being our home somewhere along the way. It had become his showroom and I had become another piece of furniture to be evaluated and found lacking. The dinner continued around me. Marcus and Devon discussed market trends while Victoria made occasional comments that suggested she had been briefed on these topics but didn't genuinely understand them. Grayson held court at the head of the table, his confidence growing with each glass of wine. I remained silent, picking at food I couldn't taste, counting the minutes until this evening would end. At one point, Devon asked about a branding challenge one of their portfolio companies was facing. Something about inconsistent messaging across platforms. I had worked on dozens of similar projects. I knew exactly what questions to ask, what strategies to suggest. But I kept silent. The earlier humiliation had taught me that my contributions were not welcome here. I was decoration, not a participant. The evening lasted another 90 minutes. 90 minutes of forced smiles and careful silence. 90 minutes of watching my husband be charming and engaging with everyone except me. 90 minutes of understanding with increasing clarity that I had never been his partner. I had been his supporter, his safety net, his convenient source of stability while he built the career that had now made me obsolete. When dinner finally concluded, Grayson shook hands with Marcus and Devon, made plans for golf and follow-up meetings. Victoria gave me a sympathetic smile that felt more pitying than kind. We collected our coats from the attendant and walked out into the October evening. The cab ride home was silent. Grayson checked his phone, scrolling through messages with the focused intensity that suggested important business. I stared out the window at the city passing by, buildings lit up against the darkening sky, and wondered when we had stopped being people who talked to each other. When we reached our building, Grayson headed immediately for the bedroom, already loosening his tie. "I have an early meeting," he called over his shoulder. "Don't wait up." I stood in the living room of my own apartment, surrounded by furniture and art I hadn't chosen, and felt the weight of 3 years settle over me like a heavy coat. I had supported this man through his lowest moments. I had believed in him when he didn't believe in himself. I had celebrated his successes as if they were our successes, never questioning the growing imbalance between what I contributed and what I received. And tonight, in front of his colleagues and business partners, he had made it clear that my contributions meant nothing. That I was an embarrassment to be managed, a problem to be contained, someone who might damage his reputation by asking his wealthy friends for help. The assumption embedded in that statement was almost worse than the insult itself. As if I had ever needed his friends' help. As if my own career, my own network, my own resources weren't sufficient. As if I was some desperate dependent clinging to him for access to people who could solve my problems. I sank onto the angular sofa that prioritized aesthetics over comfort. Another piece Grayson had chosen to replace my beloved Craigslist couch. The apartment was quiet except for the distant sound of traffic. Grayson was already in bed, probably asleep, unburdened by any awareness that he had done something wrong. I pulled out my phone thinking about calling my sister Jade, but it was past 11 and she would be asleep. I scrolled through social media instead, seeing the carefully curated versions of other people's lives. Happy couples on vacation. Career achievements celebrated with champagne. Nobody posted about the moments when they realized their marriage had become something hollow and performative. My phone buzzed with a text message. Not from Grayson but from a number I recognized. Connor Matthews, his best friend since college. The message was brief and ominous. Are you awake? I need to tell you something important. Can I call? I stared at those words, my heart beginning to race. Connor had always been kind to me, one of the few people in Grayson's life who treated my work with genuine respect. If he was reaching out at this hour, something was wrong. Something beyond the dinner humiliation. My fingers trembled slightly as I typed back. I'm awake. Call me. The phone rang twice before Connor picked up. I could hear background noise, voices and music that suggested he was out somewhere, maybe at a bar or restaurant. He moved to somewhere quieter, the sounds fading until there was just his breathing and the distant hum of city traffic. Autumn, he said, and the weight in his voice told me everything I needed to know about how serious this conversation was going to be. I'm so sorry about tonight. Marcus's assistant was there and she texted me what happened. I closed my eyes, feeling a fresh wave of humiliation wash over me. Of course people were already talking about it. Of course the story of Grayson publicly dismissing his wife was already circulating through his professional network like gossip at a high school cafeteria. I appreciate you reaching out, I said, trying to keep my voice steady. But Connor, it's almost midnight. What couldn't wait until morning? He was quiet for a long moment, and in that silence I heard him wrestling with something. A decision maybe. Or a betrayal of loyalty that was costing him more than I understood. I can't keep quiet anymore, he finally said. You need to know the truth. About Grayson. About what's really been going on. My heart began beating faster. I set down the wine glass I had been holding and gripped the phone with both hands. What truth? He's been having an affair. The words came out flat, direct, like he had rehearsed them. With Rebecca Thornton. She's a junior analyst at his firm. It's been going on for at least 8 months, maybe longer. The apartment seemed to tilt slightly. I heard the words, understood their meaning, but couldn't quite process them into reality. An affair. 8 months. While I had been supporting him, believing in our marriage, shrinking myself to fit into his expanding world, he had been with someone else. How do you know? I asked, and was surprised by how calm my voice sounded. Like I was asking about the weather rather than the destruction of my marriage. I saw them together 3 months ago at a restaurant in Brooklyn. Someplace in Williamsburg, trendy spot with exposed brick and overpriced small plates. Connor's voice carried an edge of bitterness now. They didn't see me. I was there with some colleagues from work and they were at a corner table. There was no mistaking what I was seeing, Autumn. The way they looked at each other, the body language. He was holding her hand across the table. She was laughing at something he said, touching his arm. I tried to picture it. Grayson with another woman, being charming and attentive in ways he hadn't been with me in months. Maybe years. The image formed too easily in my mind, which told me something about how absent he had been from our relationship long before tonight. I confronted him the next day, Connor continued. Called him and told him what I'd seen. He begged me not to tell you. Said it was a mistake, that he was ending it, that he loved you and didn't want to lose you. He paused. He swore he would break it off with her. I wanted to believe him. I told myself that maybe this was just a stupid mistake, that he would fix it. But he didn't end it, Autumn. He's still seeing her. Still lying to you. And after tonight, after watching him humiliate you in front of all those people, I realized I've been complicit in his deception by staying silent. The apartment felt too small suddenly, the walls pressing in. I stood up and walked to the window looking out at the city lights. Somewhere out there, Grayson was probably still at the Ashford Society, having drinks with Marcus and Devon, laughing about deals and investments, completely unburdened by what he had done to me tonight. "There's more," Connor said, his voice dropping lower. "And this part is worse, honestly. Grayson's been telling everyone in his professional circle that you're financially dependent on him. That you barely work, that your design business is more of a hobby than a real career. He's been portraying himself as this successful guy who's supporting a wife who doesn't contribute anything." The words felt like physical blows. I leaned my forehead against the cool glass of the window, trying to process what I was hearing. "He tells people you're an embarrassment," Connor continued, and I could hear how much it cost him to say this. "That he can't bring you to professional events because you lack sophistication. That you're from a different world and don't understand the kind of circles he moves in now. He's essentially rewritten your entire marriage. In his version, he's the hero who moved into your apartment to help you out financially, not the struggling entrepreneur you supported through multiple failures." I thought about all the times I had covered rent when his savings ran out. The months I had paid for groceries and utilities while he focused on his startups. The emotional labor of keeping him motivated when rejections piled up. The nights I had stayed awake with him, helping him refine pitch decks and business plans, believing we were building something together. "He's erased all of that," I said quietly. "In his story, none of my support existed." "Exactly," Connor confirmed. "And tonight, when Victoria suggested you attend the summit, he panicked. Because if you're there meeting his colleagues properly, actually talking to people, they might realize the narrative he's been selling them is complete fiction. They might discover that you're successful in your own right, that you supported him when he had nothing, that the whole dependent wife story is a lie." I understood now why Grayson had been so cruel at dinner. It wasn't spontaneous or alcohol-fueled. It was strategic. He needed to reinforce the narrative, to remind his colleagues that I was someone to be pitied rather than respected. Someone who needed to be kept at a distance. "Why didn't you tell me sooner?" I asked, and there was no accusation in my voice. Just genuine curiosity. Connor sighed deeply. "Because he's been my best friend since college. We've been through everything together. I kept thinking he would do the right thing, that he would end the affair and fix things with you. I didn't want to be the person who destroyed his marriage if there was a chance he could fix it himself." He paused. "But tonight showed me he's not going to fix anything. He's going to keep treating you like this, keep lying, keep rewriting history to make himself look good." And I couldn't stay silent anymore. "You deserve to know the truth." I felt something shift inside me. Not breaking but realigning. Like a puzzle piece finally clicking into place. The dinner humiliation hadn't been an isolated incident. It had been part of a larger pattern, a systematic campaign to diminish my worth while Grayson built himself up through lies and betrayal. "Thank you for telling me," I said, and meant it. "I know this wasn't easy." "I'm sorry I didn't tell you sooner," Connor said. "For what it's worth, everyone who actually knows you knows the truth. The people who matter can see who you really are. Grayson's colleagues only know the version he's shown them." After we hung up, I sat in the darkness of my living room for a long time. The apartment was silent except for the ambient noise of the city filtering through the windows. Grayson still hadn't come home. Hadn't called or texted. The fact that he could humiliate me publicly and then simply disappear spoke volumes about how little he valued me. I looked around at the space that had once been mine. The abstract art that cost thousands of dollars but meant nothing to me. The furniture chosen for appearance rather than comfort. The kitchen appliances I never used because Grayson preferred we eat at restaurants where being seen mattered more than the food. Every detail of this apartment reflected his taste, his aspirations, his version of what our life should look like. I had been erased from my own home the same way I had been erased from his narrative about our marriage. Slowly, systematically, until there was almost nothing left of the person I had been before he moved in. But Connor's phone call had done something unexpected. It had given me clarity. Not just about the affair or the lies, but about the entire structure of my marriage. I had been operating under the assumption that we were partners, that his success was our success, that supporting him was what love looked like. Now I could see it differently. I hadn't been his partner. I had been his safety net, his convenient source of stability while he built the career that had made me obsolete. And when I was no longer useful, when my presence threatened the false narrative he had constructed about himself, he had discarded me with the same ease he might discard an outdated business plan. My phone buzzed with a text message. Finally, Grayson. But the message wasn't an apology or explanation. It was a simple statement: staying at Marcus's place tonight. Early meeting tomorrow. Don't wait up. I stared at those words, seeing them for what they were. Not consideration for my sleep schedule, but avoidance. He didn't want to face me, didn't want to deal with any potential confrontation about what had happened at dinner. He was giving himself time to craft his defense, to prepare his explanations. Or maybe he was with Rebecca. Maybe the early meeting was another lie in a relationship apparently built on lies. I set the phone down and walked to the bedroom. Tomorrow would require energy and clarity. Tomorrow I would need to figure out what came next. But tonight I just needed to process the fact that my marriage, the life I thought I had been building for 3 years, had been revealed as something hollow and false. I climbed into bed still wearing my black dress, too exhausted to change. The sheets smelled like the expensive detergent Grayson insisted on using, another small detail of my life that he had taken control of without me fully noticing. Sleep felt impossible, but eventually exhaustion won over racing thoughts. My last conscious thought was wondering how I had let myself become so small, so invisible, so thoroughly convinced that my worth was measured by someone else's opinion of me. Morning arrived without sleep. I had lain in bed for hours, still wearing the black dress from dinner, staring at the ceiling while my mind replayed every conversation, every excuse, every moment over the past 8 months that suddenly made sense in a different, darker context. The late-night meetings that ran until 2 in the morning. The weekend conference in Miami where he had been unreachable for entire afternoons. The business trip to the Hamptons where he had forgotten to call me for 3 days straight. All of it had been Rebecca. Around 4 in the morning something inside me shifted. The shock and grief that had paralyzed me began transforming into something sharper, more focused. I wasn't just hurt anymore. I was angry. And beneath the anger was something even more powerful: determination. If Grayson had been methodically building a double life, creating an alternate version of our marriage to justify his betrayal, then I needed to know everything. I needed evidence, documentation, proof that would make it impossible for him to rewrite this story the way he had rewritten everything else about us. I sat up in bed and reached for my phone. It was 4:17 in the morning, too early to call anyone, but I opened my notes app and started making a list. What did I actually know? What could I prove? What questions needed answers? By the time dawn light started filtering through the bedroom windows, I had filled 3 pages with observations and questions. Grayson's behavior over the past year, examined through this new lens of betrayal, formed patterns I had been too trusting to see before. The way he had started working out more frequently, suddenly concerned with his appearance in ways he had never been during our early years together. The new cologne that appeared in our bathroom without explanation. The expensive haircuts at a barber in Soho that cost more than I spent on groceries in a week. He had been performing for someone. Just not for me. At 7 in the morning I called my sister Jade. She answered on the 3rd ring, her voice thick with sleep. "Autumn? What's wrong?" "Everything," I said, and my voice cracked slightly on that single word. "Can you come over? I need help." Jade arrived at my apartment 50 minutes later, her partner Simone close behind. Jade was 3 years older than me, a family law attorney with a practice in Brooklyn. She had always been protective, sometimes overbearing, but right now her fierce competence felt exactly like what I needed. Simone worked in digital forensics for a corporate security firm, helping companies investigate internal fraud and data breaches. I let them in and immediately started talking, the words tumbling out faster than I could organize them. The dinner at the Ashford Society. Grayson's public humiliation. Connor's phone call revealing the affair with Rebecca. The lies Grayson had been telling about me, painting me as financially dependent and unsophisticated. Jade's expression grew harder with each detail I shared. She had never particularly liked Grayson, though she had been diplomatic enough not to say so directly. Once, about a year ago, she had mentioned that he had a way of making me feel grateful for basic respect, a comment I had dismissed as overprotective sister instinct. Now I understood she had seen something I had been too close to recognize. "We're going to find everything," Jade said when I finally stopped talking. Her voice was quiet but carried absolute certainty. Every piece of evidence, every lie, every moment he thought he was getting away with something. And then we're going to make sure you're protected. Simone had already opened her laptop on my kitchen counter. Let's start with the obvious places, she said, her fingers moving across the keyboard with practiced efficiency. Shared accounts, cloud storage, any devices or platforms where he might have been careless with his digital footprint. I made coffee while they worked, grateful to have something to do with my hands. The normalcy of the action, measuring grounds and pouring water, felt absurdly comforting given that my entire life was falling apart. Walk me through your digital life, Simone said, accepting the coffee I handed her. Do you have shared email accounts? Cloud storage? Any devices you both use? I thought about it, trying to focus through the exhaustion and emotional overload. We have a shared cloud storage account. Grayson asked me to set it up about a year ago. He said he needed help organizing his business files and personal documents, keeping everything backed up. Simone's eyebrows rose slightly. He asked you to manage his cloud storage? He said he trusted me with it, I said, hearing how naive that sounded now. He gave me the login credentials and asked me to make sure everything was properly organized and backed up regularly. Jade and Simone exchanged a look that I couldn't quite interpret. Show us, Simone said. I retrieved my laptop from the bedroom and logged into the cloud storage account. The main directory appeared, filled with folders labeled with professional-sounding names. Investment reports. Client presentations. Market analysis. Conference materials. Simone took control of the laptop, her movements quick and confident. Most people who are hiding something bury it under layers of legitimate content, she explained as she worked. They assume nobody will dig deep enough to find anything problematic. She opened folder after folder, scanning contents quickly, occasionally making notes on her own device. Jade watched over her shoulder while I stood nearby, afraid to hope we would find anything and equally afraid we would. Here, Simone said suddenly. She had navigated several layers deep into the conference materials folder and opened a subfolder labeled simply, Personal_Archive. The name alone was enough to make my stomach tighten. Inside were hundreds of files. Photos mostly. Simone opened the first one and I felt the air leave my lungs. Grayson and Rebecca at a restaurant I didn't recognize, sitting close together at an intimate table. Her hand was on his arm, both of them laughing at something. The photo was recent, maybe a few weeks old based on what Grayson was wearing. I recognized the shirt because I had been with him when he bought it. Simone scrolled through more photos. Grayson and Rebecca at what looked like a rooftop bar, the Manhattan skyline visible behind them. Hotel room photos with rumpled sheets and Rebecca's clothing visible on a chair. Weekend trips to locations Grayson had told me were solo business retreats. A yacht party where Rebecca wore a bikini and Grayson's arm was around her waist. Each image felt like a small detonation in my chest. This wasn't a momentary mistake or a brief lapse in judgment. This was a relationship, documented and chronicled with the same attention to detail Grayson brought to his professional work. There are text message screenshots here too, Simone said quietly, opening another folder. Intimate conversations between Grayson and Rebecca, flirting and planning and discussions about me that made my face burn with humiliation. In one exchange, Rebecca asked if Grayson's roommate would be a problem for their upcoming trip. Roommate. That was how he had described me to her. Keep going, Jade said, her voice hard. She had moved to stand beside me, one hand on my shoulder in silent support. Simone found expense receipts next. Jewelry purchases from stores I had never heard of. Flower deliveries to an address in the West Village that I assumed must be Rebecca's apartment. Hotel stays during trips Grayson had claimed were solo business travel. Everything was meticulously documented and saved, as if Grayson was building his own archive of the affair. Why would he save all of this? I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. Why keep evidence of his own betrayal? Arrogance, Jade said flatly. He didn't think you would ever look. He didn't think you were capable of threatening him. Simone was already downloading everything, copying files to an external drive. We need to back all of this up in multiple locations, she said. Cloud storage of our own physical drives, everything. This is your evidence, Autumn. This proves the affair, proves the timeline, proves everything Connor told you. While Simone worked, Jade had pulled out her own laptop and was accessing different systems. "I'm looking at property records and lease agreements," she explained. "I want to understand the legal situation with your apartment." I watched her work, feeling strangely detached from everything happening around me. Less than 24 hours ago, I had been getting ready for a dinner I hoped would bring me closer to my husband's professional life. Now I was sitting in my kitchen while my sister and her partner systematically documented evidence of his betrayal. "Autumn," Jade said, and something in her voice made me focus on her immediately. "The apartment is solely in your name." I blinked, trying to process what she was saying. "What do you mean?" "The lease, the deed, all the property records. Everything is in your name only. Grayson moved into your apartment 3 years ago, and despite his subsequent success and all the money he spent renovating the place, he never got added to any legal documents. Legally speaking, he's a guest in your home. An expensive, unfaithful guest who has overstayed his welcome." I stared at her, the implications of that statement slowly sinking in. "So you can ask him to leave," Jade confirmed. "You have the legal right to remove him from your property. He's not a tenant because he's never paid rent or been on a lease. He's not a co-owner because he's not on the deed. He's legally classified as a guest, and you can revoke that hospitality anytime you choose." For the first time since the dinner at the Ashford Society, I felt something other than pain and betrayal. I felt power. Not vindictive or cruel, but solid and real. Grayson had spent 3 years making me feel small, dependent, grateful for his tolerance of my inadequacies. He had systematically diminished my worth while building his affair and his false narratives. But he had built all of it on foundation that was legally mine. The apartment was mine. The life he had redesigned to reflect his aspirations existed only because I had allowed him into my space. And I could take that permission back. The sense of power I felt sitting in my kitchen with Jade and Simone, surrounded by evidence of Grayson's betrayal and armed with the knowledge that the apartment was legally mine, sustained me through the rest of that morning. But by early afternoon, exhaustion began setting in. I had been awake for over 30 hours, running on adrenaline and coffee, and my body was starting to demand rest. Jade noticed me swaying slightly as I stood at the kitchen counter. "You need to sleep," she said firmly. "Simone and I have everything backed up in multiple locations. The evidence is secure. You need to take care of yourself now." I wanted to argue, but she was right. I retreated to the bedroom and managed to fall into a fitful sleep that lasted about 3 hours. When I woke, it was past 2 in the afternoon and my phone was buzzing with an incoming text message. "Grayson." Finally. I picked up the phone, my heart rate accelerating despite my exhaustion. The message was brief and infuriating. "We need to talk. I think you overreacted last night." I read those words 3 times, feeling my anger intensify with each reading. Overreacted. He genuinely believed that walking out after he publicly humiliated me in front of his colleagues was an overreaction. In his version of events, I was the problem. Not his cruelty, not his affair, not his systematic campaign to diminish me and rewrite our marriage into something unrecognizable. Me. I had overreacted. I walked back to the kitchen where Jade was still working on her laptop. I showed her the message without saying anything. She read it and shook her head with something that looked like disgust. "Classic narcissist behavior," she said. "He rewrites reality to make himself the victim. In his mind, he's the reasonable one trying to have a mature conversation, and you're being emotional and difficult." "Should I ignore it?" I asked, though I already knew what I wanted to do. Jade studied my face for a moment. "Do you want to ignore it?" "No," I admitted. "I want to confront him. I want him to know that I know everything. About Rebecca, about the lies he's been telling about me, about all of it." "Then confront him," Jade said simply. "But do it on your terms, in a public place, and be prepared for him to lie and manipulate. He's going to try to control the narrative." I thought about where to meet him. Not our apartment, where he might feel comfortable enough to be aggressive or dismissive. Not the Ashford Society or anywhere near his professional world. Somewhere neutral, somewhere that held meaning for us, somewhere that would remind him of who we used to be before everything became poisoned by his ambition and deceit. I texted back, "Café Renoir. 4 p.m. Café Renoir was where we had our first date 4 years ago. I had been immediately drawn to the place. A small coffee shop in the West Village with mismatched furniture and local art on the walls. The kind of unpretentious space that felt welcoming rather than exclusive. We had talked for hours that afternoon about art and design and our different approaches to work. Grayson had seemed genuinely interested in my perspective back then, asking thoughtful questions about my creative process and my vision for building a freelance career. That conversation felt like it had happened in a different lifetime between two different people. I arrived at Café Renoir at 3:45, wanting to claim the space before Grayson got there. I chose the corner table near the window, the one with good natural light and a clear view of the entrance. I ordered coffee I knew I probably would not drink and positioned my phone on the table, the screen showing one of the yacht photos of Grayson and Rebecca. Jade had offered to come with me, to sit at a nearby table as backup in case Grayson became difficult. I had declined. This was something I needed to do alone. I needed Grayson to understand that I was not the helpless, dependent woman he had portrayed to his colleagues. I was the woman who held all the evidence of his betrayal and all the legal power to remove him from my life. At 4:23, Grayson finally walked through the door. The lateness was deliberate, I recognized immediately. A power play designed to establish dominance, to make me wait and wonder if he would show up at all. He scanned the cafe until he spotted me, then approached with the kind of practiced confidence I had watched him develop over the past year. Everything about his body language suggested he believed he was in control of this situation. He wore the navy suit, the one I had helped him select for his first major investor pitch 3 years ago. I had gone with him to 3 different stores, offering opinions on fit and color, celebrating with him when he finally landed the meeting that suit was meant for. Seeing him wear it now felt like psychological warfare, a reminder of how I had supported his success while he was busy rewriting history to erase my contributions. He slid into the chair across from me, his expression mixing irritation with condescension. There was no apology in his eyes, no acknowledgement that he might have done something wrong. He looked at me the way someone might look at a difficult client who needed to be managed. "Look," he started, his tone patronizing in a way that made my jaw tighten. "About last night. I had too much to drink and everyone knows I say stupid things when I'm drinking. Nobody took it seriously, Autumn. You're making this into something bigger than it needs to be." I watched him deliver these lines with practiced ease, each word carefully chosen to minimize what he had done and shift responsibility onto me for caring about it. He genuinely believed this explanation would satisfy me, that I would nod and accept his version of events and we would move on as if nothing significant had happened. I let him finish his prepared speech. Let him think he was succeeding in controlling the narrative. Then I interrupted with a single question. "Who's Rebecca Thornton?" The effect was immediate and visceral. Color drained from Grayson's face with remarkable speed, as if someone had opened a valve and let all the confidence and composure pour out of him. His mouth opened, then closed, then opened again. His eyes widened slightly before he controlled the reaction. But that initial moment of pure panic told me everything I needed to know about how unprepared he was for this confrontation. "What?" he managed finally, but his voice had lost all its patronizing certainty. I slid my phone across the table slowly, deliberately. The screen showed the yacht photo in full detail. Grayson and Rebecca together, his arm around her waist, both of them smiling at the camera with the easy intimacy of people who had forgotten to be careful about documenting their betrayal. "Rebecca Thornton," I repeated, my voice calm despite the adrenaline making my hands want to shake. "The junior analyst from your firm. The woman you've been seeing since February at the latest, probably longer. The one you took to Miami and the Hamptons and all those business trips where spouses supposedly weren't invited." Grayson stared at the phone like it was something dangerous that might explode if he touched it. I watched him cycle through emotions in rapid succession. Shock giving way to anger, anger shifting into calculation, calculation dissolving into something that looked disturbingly like fear. "How did you?" he started, then stopped himself, perhaps realizing that the question itself was an admission. "The shared cloud storage you asked me to manage last year," I said, leaning back in my chair and feeling a surge of power I had not experienced in years. "Remember that? You said you trusted me to organize your business files and keep everything properly backed up. Really thoughtful of you, actually. Very organized. You documented everything like you were creating a portfolio presentation. I particularly enjoyed the expense receipts for jewelry and flowers and hotel rooms." His face had gone from pale to flushed now, a deep red creeping up his neck. "Autumn, listen. I talked to Connor, by the way," I continued, not letting him regain control of the conversation. "He told me everything. About the affair that he's known about for 3 months. About how you've been portraying me to your colleagues as some kind of dependent failure who barely works. About how you've told everyone I'm an embarrassment you can't bring around sophisticated people. About how you've systematically erased every contribution I made to your success so you could play the role of the self-made man tolerating a wife who doesn't contribute anything. Grayson's hands were flat on the table now, his fingers spread wide like he was trying to steady himself. You don't understand, he said, his voice tight. The business world is complicated. Appearances matter. I was trying to protect. Protect what? I interrupted. Your reputation, your career. Because you certainly weren't trying to protect me or our marriage or anything resembling the truth. He opened his mouth to respond, then seemed to think better of it. I could see him recalibrating, trying to find an angle that would give him leverage in this conversation. But for once he had nothing. No charm, no manipulation, no carefully constructed narrative that would make this my fault instead of his. The cafe continued its normal operations around us. The barista called out drink orders. Other patrons worked on laptops or read books. Nobody paid attention to the quiet dissolution of a marriage happening in the corner by the window. Grayson sat across from me in Café Renoir, his hands still flat on the table, his face cycling through shades of red and pale as he tried to formulate a response that would salvage this situation. I could see his mind working, searching for the angle that would give him leverage, the explanation that would make me doubt what I knew to be true. Autumn, listen to me, he finally said, his voice taking on a tone I recognized from his business negotiations. Reasonable, measured, designed to make the other person feel like they were being irrational. We can work through this. Every marriage has rough patches. People make mistakes. We can go to counseling, figure out where things went wrong, rebuild what we had. He reached across the table toward my hand, a gesture that probably looked conciliatory to anyone watching from a distance. I pulled my hand away before his fingers could make contact. The thought of him touching me, the same hands that had touched Rebecca in hotel rooms and on yachts and in all those documented moments of betrayal, made my stomach turn. No, Grayson, I said, my voice steady and clear. We cannot work through this. Because here is what is going to happen. You are going to pack your belongings and leave my apartment by Sunday evening. The lease has always been in my name. You are not a tenant. You are a guest who has worn out his welcome. His expression shifted immediately. The reasonable negotiator disappeared, replaced by something harder and angrier. The mask of contrition he had been wearing slipped just enough to reveal what was underneath. You cannot just kick me out of our home, he said, his voice rising slightly. A woman at a nearby table glanced over at us, then quickly looked away. Hi home, I corrected, leaning forward slightly. It was always mine. You moved into my space 3 years ago, remember? Before you redesigned it to reflect your aesthetic and your aspirations. Before you replaced all my furniture and took down my posters and reorganized my books. Before you transformed it into a showroom for your success. You did all of that without ever bothering to get your name on the lease or the deed. Grayson opened his mouth to respond, but I was not finished. You treated my home the same way you treated our marriage, I continued. Like it was yours to reshape however you wanted without my input or consent mattering at all. But legally, Grayson, you have no claim to that apartment. You never have. And I want you out. He stared at me with an expression I had never seen before. Not anger exactly, though that was part of it. Something closer to genuine shock, as if he had truly never considered the possibility that I might have power in this situation. This is insane, he said, his voice tight. You are being vindictive. You are trying to punish me instead of trying to save our marriage. I am not trying to save something that was never real, I replied. You have been lying to me for at least 8 months, probably longer. You have been telling your colleagues that I am a dependent embarrassment while conducting an affair and using company resources to fund it. You publicly humiliated me 2 nights ago in front of everyone who matters to your career. There is nothing left to save here, Grayson. There is just the legal reality that the apartment is mine and you need to leave it. He sat back in his chair, his jaw working as he tried to control his anger. Where am I supposed to go? That is not my concern, I said simply. You have had 3 years of rent-free living to build up savings. You have a successful career and wealthy friends. I am confident you will figure something out. I stood up, gathering my bag and my phone with the incriminating photos still displayed on the screen. I had one more piece of information to deliver, One final move that would ensure Grayson understood exactly how thoroughly his carefully constructed world was about to collapse. "Oh, and Grayson?" I said, pausing beside the table. "Rebecca might want to know you are married. I hear transparency is important in professional relationships." The color drained from his face for the third time in our conversation. He stared up at me, finally processing that I was not just talking about evicting him from the apartment. I was talking about exposing the lies he had told Rebecca, the false narrative he had constructed where I was his assistant or roommate or whatever convenient fiction he had invented to justify his affair. "You would not," he said, but his voice lacked conviction. "I have not decided yet," I said honestly. "But you should probably prepare for the possibility." I walked out of Café Renoir while Grayson remained frozen at the table, finally understanding that he had no control over this situation anymore. The bell above the door chimed as I left, a small sound that felt absurdly triumphant given the circumstances. The October air outside was cool and clean after the stale atmosphere of the café. I walked slowly toward the subway, processing what had just happened. I had confronted my husband with evidence of his betrayal. I had claimed my power in a situation where he had spent years making me feel powerless. I had drawn a clear line and given him a deadline to leave my home. And surprisingly, I did not feel sad. I felt lighter, as if I had been carrying weight I had not fully recognized until I set it down. My phone rang as I reached the subway entrance. "Connor, I heard you confronted him," he said when I answered. "Marcus texted me. Apparently Grayson called him right after you left the cafe. How are you holding up?" "I am okay," I said, surprised to realize it was true. "Better than okay, actually. I told him he has until Sunday to move out." "Good," Connor said firmly. "Listen, I know this is going to sound like I am taking sides, but I am taking sides. What Grayson did to you is unforgivable. If you need anything, if you need help with the move out or just someone to talk to, I am here." I felt unexpected emotion tighten my throat. "Actually, there is something. Would you be willing to be at the apartment on Sunday? I do not want to be there alone with him when he is packing. I do not want him to try to manipulate the situation or make me feel guilty or any of the other tactics he is probably already planning." "Absolutely," Connor said without hesitation. "I will be there." "In autumn? If he asks me to advocate for him or help him convince you to change your mind, I am going to refuse. He does not deserve that support right now." After we hung up, I called Jade and asked the same favor. She agreed immediately and said Simone would come as well. By the time I reached my apartment that evening, I had assembled a small team of people who would ensure that Grayson's departure was documented, legal, and free from the kind of emotional manipulation he excelled at. The apartment felt different when I walked in. Still full of his furniture and his art and his expensive kitchen appliances, but somehow less oppressive. These were just objects now, things that would be removed soon. They no longer represented my erasure because I had already begun the process of reclaiming my space. I opened my laptop and sent a brief email to my landlord, informing him that my husband would be moving out by Sunday evening and asking if there were any procedures I needed to follow. His response came within an hour, confirming what Jade had already told me. Since Grayson had never been on the lease, I had the right to ask him to leave with reasonable notice, which I had provided. The next 3 days passed in a strange limbo. Grayson did not come back to the apartment Wednesday night or Thursday night. I assumed he was staying with Marcus or possibly with Rebecca, though I tried not to think too much about that. He sent a few text messages that ranged from angry accusations to pleading requests for more time to cold logistical questions about which furniture he could take. I responded only to the logistical questions, keeping my answers brief and clear. He could take anything he had purchased. He could not take anything that had been mine before he moved in. Shared items would stay with the apartment. It was not a negotiation. Sunday afternoon arrived with surprising speed. I left the apartment at noon and walked to a coffee shop several blocks away, not wanting to be present for the actual packing process. Connor, Jade, and Simone would handle supervision. They would document everything, ensure nothing was taken that should not be, and most importantly, prevent Grayson from trying to engage me in some last-minute emotional appeal. Connor sent me updates throughout the afternoon, brief messages that kept me informed without requiring responses. He arrived with Marcus. "Packing clothes now. Trying to claim some books from your shelf." Jade reminded him those were yours before he moved in. Arguing about the furniture he bought. Simone pointed out he is fortunate you are not asking for compensation for 3 years of free housing. Found him attempting to access files on the shared laptop. Already backed up everything so no damage done. At 6:15 in the evening my phone buzzed with the final message. He is gone. Left a note on the kitchen counter. We stayed until he was completely out. The apartment is yours again. I sat in the coffee shop for another few minutes, letting that information settle. For the first time in 3 years, my apartment was truly mine again. No more walking on eggshells around someone who treated my presence as an inconvenience. No more shrinking myself to fit into someone else's vision of what our life should be. No more pretending that systematic disrespect was just personality quirks I needed to accept. I paid for my coffee and walked home slowly, savoring the cool October evening. When I unlocked the door and stepped inside, the change was immediately visible. Empty spaces where his furniture had been. Bare walls where his abstract art had hung. The apartment looked oddly sparse now, half empty in ways that emphasized how much of my original space he had replaced. But it felt clean. Purged. Like I had removed an infection I had not fully recognized until it was gone. On the kitchen counter, exactly where Connor said it would be, I found Grayson's note. A single piece of paper torn from a notebook, his handwriting rushed and angry in a way that contradicted the carefully composed message. I hope you find whatever it is you're looking for. I read those words twice, feeling a mixture of anger and something close to pity. Even in his final communication he had to frame this as my failure rather than his. As if I were the one searching for something elusive, as if I had somehow lost my way, as if reclaiming my own apartment and my own dignity was evidence of confusion rather than clarity. I crumpled the note and walked to the kitchen trash can. The act of throwing it away felt more satisfying than it probably should have. A small symbolic gesture that marked the end of his presence in my space. The paper landed on top of yesterday's coffee grounds and takeout containers, exactly where it belonged. I turned slowly, taking in the apartment with fresh eyes. Empty spaces marked where his oversized leather sectional had dominated the living room. Pale rectangles on the walls showed where his abstract art had hung. The kitchen looked sparse without his expensive espresso machine and designer knife block. Even the air felt different, lighter somehow, as if the physical removal of his belongings had also removed some invisible weight that had been pressing down on everything. What remained was a strange hybrid space. My vintage rug that he had tolerated but never liked. His minimalist coffee table that I had never found comfortable. My bookshelf, now half empty after he had taken the books he claimed to have purchased. His sound system too integrated into the wall to remove easily. It was an uncomfortable coexistence of two different aesthetics, two different visions of what a home should be. But it was mine to resolve. Mine to redesign. Mine to fill with things that actually brought me comfort rather than just looking impressive to people who never actually visited. I walked to the window and looked out at the city. Sunday evening in Tribeca, lights beginning to come on in apartments across the street, the distant sound of traffic and conversation filtering up from the sidewalk below. This view had been mine for 5 years, long before Grayson entered my life. I had stood at this window countless times, morning coffee in hand, watching the neighborhood wake up. Somewhere along the way I had stopped noticing it, too focused on making Grayson comfortable to remember that this space had meaning to me first. My phone buzzed. A text from my friend Maya, a fellow designer I had known since college. Heard through the grapevine that you kicked Grayson out. Good for you. Want company? I can bring wine and terrible reality TV. I smiled, realizing how isolated I had become over the past few years. Maya and I used to meet for coffee every week, sharing work frustrations and celebrating small victories. Gradually, those meetings had become less frequent as Grayson's demands on my time increased. He had never explicitly discouraged my friendships, but he had made his disapproval clear in small ways. Comments about how much time I spent with Maya. Sighs when I mentioned plans with other friends. Subtle pressure to stay home with him instead. I texted back, come over. Bring whatever wine is on sale. I'll order pizza from the place Grayson always hated. She arrived 40 minutes later with 2 bottles of cheap red wine and a bag of cookies from the bakery down the street. We sat on the floor of my half-empty living room because the only remaining seating was Grayson's uncomfortable coffee table, and ate pizza straight from the box while Maya caught me up on 3 years of life I had only partially been present for. You know what I noticed? Maya said, gesturing around the apartment with a slice of pizza. This place finally looks like it has space to breathe. All that heavy furniture he brought in made everything feel cramped and dark. He was right. Without the oversized sectional and the bulky entertainment center, the living room felt twice as large. The evening light from the windows actually reached the far wall now instead of being blocked by furniture positioned for appearance rather than function. I was thinking about repainting, I said. These walls have been this gray color since he moved in. I used to have them a warm cream color that made everything feel cozy. Do it, Maya said immediately. Reclaim this space completely. Make it yours again. That first night alone felt absurdly rebellious in ways that highlighted how constrained my life had become. I put my feet up on the coffee table without worrying about water rings or scratches. I watched a reality dating show that Grayson would have mocked mercilessly. I opened the second bottle of wine even though it was a weeknight and Grayson's voice in my head tried to remind me that successful people didn't drink cheap wine on Sundays. After Maya left around 11, I did something I had been thinking about since I walked back into the apartment. I went to the hall closet where I had stored boxes of my old belongings, things Grayson had deemed too juvenile or cluttered for our sophisticated living space. Concert posters from my 20s, carefully rolled and preserved. Photographs of friends and family that he had replaced with abstract art. A quilt my grandmother had made that he said clashed with our aesthetic. I pulled out the box of concert posters and unrolled the first one. A show I had attended 7 years ago, a band I loved that Grayson had never heard of and never cared to learn about. The poster was vibrant and chaotic, all the things his carefully curated abstract art was not. I found a hammer and nails in the kitchen junk drawer and spent the next hour hanging posters throughout the apartment. Above my bed where his black and white photography had been. In the living room where his most expensive abstract piece had dominated. In the hallway where he had insisted on minimalist emptiness. By midnight, my apartment looked less like a showroom and more like a home. Imperfect, eclectic, reflecting actual personality rather than aspirational sophistication. I fell asleep that night in my own bed in my own apartment surrounded by my own things and slept better than I had in months. The next morning, Jade came over with coffee and bagels, a gesture of support that felt more valuable than she probably realized. We sat on the floor of my mostly empty living room, our backs against the wall, and she asked the question I had been avoiding. How are you really doing? I considered lying, giving her the strong and resilient answer she probably expected. The answer that suggested I was processing this maturely and moving forward with grace. But Jade had been there through everything. She deserved honesty. I feel relieved, I admitted. Is that wrong? My marriage just ended. I discovered my husband was cheating on me and lying about me to everyone he knew. Shouldn't I be devastated? Jade squeezed my hand. You're not grieving the marriage you actually had. You're grieving the marriage you thought you had. Once you realize those weren't the same thing, relief is a perfectly reasonable response. We spent the next 2 hours talking through everything. The warning signs I had missed or deliberately ignored. The gradual erosion of my confidence as Grayson positioned his success against my supposed inadequacy. The systematic nature of his manipulation, so subtle that I had mistaken it for personality quirks rather than recognizing it as a coordinated campaign to make me smaller. He was never going to let you be an equal, Jade said at one point. His entire sense of self was built on being superior to you. If you were successful and confident and valued by his colleagues, it would have undermined the story he was telling himself about why he deserved his success. Later that week, Connor called with information I had not asked for but secretly wanted. I was painting the bedroom walls, rolling warm cream color over the stark gray Grayson had chosen when my phone rang. He's staying with Marcus temporarily, Connor said after we exchanged greetings. Called me yesterday asking if I would advocate for him, help him convince you to reconsider the separation. And what did you tell him? I asked, though I already knew from Connor's tone. I told him that wasn't happening. That what he did was unforgivable and he needed to accept the consequences instead of trying to manipulate his way out of them. Connor paused. You should know he's spinning the story to everyone who will listen. Telling people you kicked him out over a misunderstanding, that you overreacted to a joke at dinner, that you're being unreasonable and vindictive. I laughed, surprising both of us. Let him spin whatever story he wants. I have 400 pieces of evidence that tell the truth. And honestly, Connor, I don't care what his colleagues think of me anymore. I'm never going to see them again. Their opinions stopped mattering the moment I walked out of the Ashford Society. Connor sounded relieved. Good. You deserve better than spending energy on people who never valued you anyway. He hesitated before continuing. There's something else you should know. The Partners Summit is next week in the Hamptons. Rebecca will be there. And given how these things work, someone is bound to mention you eventually. Mention that Grayson's wife kicked him out. She's going to find out he was married. I set down my paint roller and looked at the half-finished wall. One side cream, one side gray, a visual representation of transformation in progress. What happens after that is not my responsibility, I said quietly. I didn't create this situation. I just stopped protecting him from the consequences of his own choices. The painting project took 3 days to complete. By the time I finished, my apartment had been transformed from Grayson's gray minimalist showcase into something warmer and more welcoming. The walls glowed with the cream color I had originally chosen years ago, and the concert posters added personality that had been missing since he moved in. I was organizing my newly reclaimed bookshelf, finally arranging books by author the way that made sense to me, when Connor called on a Wednesday afternoon. His tone immediately signaled that this was not a routine check-in. You need to hear this, he said, and I could hear barely contained excitement in his voice. Something happened at the Partners Summit this past weekend. I set down the book I had been holding and moved to the window. What kind of something? The kind that involves Grayson's entire world imploding in spectacular fashion, Connor said. Apparently someone at the summit mentioned to Rebecca that Grayson's wife had finally kicked him out. Used those exact words. His wife. My heart rate accelerated immediately. Rebecca didn't know he was married? She had absolutely no idea, Connor confirmed. According to what I heard from multiple sources, Grayson told her you were his executive assistant. Someone who managed his schedule and handled his personal affairs. She genuinely believed you were an employee, Autumn. When people at the summit started talking about how you had kicked him out, how you were his wife throughout their entire relationship, she apparently demanded clarification from several different people before she would believe it. I sat down on the floor, my back against the wall, processing this information. Grayson had lied to Rebecca with the same thoroughness he had lied to me. He had constructed a completely fictional version of his life where he was single and successful, unencumbered by a marriage or any commitments that might complicate his affair. Rebecca had been operating under entirely false pretenses, just as I had been operating under the false pretense that my husband was faithful. What happened when she found out? I asked, though I could already imagine the scene. Connor's voice took on a tone of satisfaction that suggested he had heard this story multiple times and enjoyed it more with each retelling. She confronted him in front of everyone. And I mean everyone. The summit has this big reception on Saturday evening where all the partners and major investors gather for cocktails before dinner. Rebecca walked right up to Grayson in the middle of this reception and demanded to know why he had lied to her about being married. I closed my eyes, picturing the scene. The same kind of exclusive gathering where Grayson had humiliated me, now becoming the setting for his own public exposure. She didn't hold back, Connor continued. Called him a liar and a fraud. Told everyone within hearing distance that he had deliberately deceived her about every aspect of his personal life. Said he had been using company resources to fund their relationship. She announced that she was filing a formal complaint with the firm about his professional conduct. And then she walked away while everyone stood there watching. I felt a strange mixture of emotions washing over me. Satisfaction at the poetic justice, certainly. The same crowd that had witnessed my humiliation at the Ashford Society now saw Grayson's public rejection. But I also felt something unexpected. Sympathy for Rebecca. She had been manipulated just as thoroughly as I had been, fed a completely false narrative that allowed Grayson to justify his behavior to himself. Is she okay? I asked. Rebecca, I mean. Connor seemed surprised by the question. I don't know honestly. But that's generous of you to ask, considering. She's not the villain here, I said quietly. She was lied to just like I was. Grayson constructed an entire fictional reality for both of us, keeping us separate so neither of us would discover the truth. She's a victim in this too. That's a remarkably mature perspective, Connor said. But you should know the story doesn't end with the confrontation. Rebecca actually followed through on her threat. She filed a formal complaint with the firm on Monday morning. My attention sharpened. What kind of complaint? Professional misconduct. Ethics violations. The complaint triggered an internal investigation, and apparently once they started digging, they found a lot of problematic behavior. Connor's voice took on a more serious tone. Grayson had been using company credit cards for personal expenses related to the affair. Hotel rooms, expensive dinners, jewelry. All of it charged to accounts that were supposed to be for business development and client entertainment. He was falsifying expense reports, categorizing personal spending as business expenses. I thought about all those trips he had claimed were essential for work. The weekend in Miami that he said was a crucial conference. The multiple trips to the Hamptons for meetings with potential clients. How many of those had been legitimate business and how many had been opportunities to spend time with Rebecca on the company's money? The firm is taking it seriously, Connor continued. They placed him on administrative leave while they complete the investigation. Marcus is apparently furious, not because of the affair itself but because Grayson exposed the firm to potential legal liability. If clients found out their account fees were funding someone's personal relationship, it could be grounds for breach of fiduciary duty. I stood up and walked to the window looking out at the city. Somewhere out there, Grayson was watching his carefully constructed professional life collapse the same way his marriage had collapsed. The lies that had seemed so sustainable when he was controlling the narrative were unraveling now that other people were examining them. There's more, Connor said. Several of Grayson's clients requested new account handlers once word of the scandal started spreading. Nobody wants to be associated with someone under investigation for ethics violations. And you know how that industry works. Reputation is currency. Once you're marked as unethical or unreliable, people distance themselves to protect their own standing. Over the next week, Connor kept me updated on developments I had not asked about but could not help being curious about. The firm's investigation expanded beyond just the expense report fraud. They discovered that Grayson had been inflating his performance metrics, taking credit for deals that had been collaborative efforts, and generally presenting a version of his professional accomplishments that was only loosely connected to reality. The same pattern that had defined his personal life, apparently. Creating false narratives, rewriting history to make himself look better, erasing the contributions of others to elevate his own status. Victoria reached out to me through a carefully worded email that arrived on a Thursday afternoon. She apologized for not speaking up at the dinner, acknowledged that she should have said something when Grayson humiliated me, and mentioned that she and Marcus now understood there had been much more going on than they had realized. The email felt more like covering their own liability than genuine remorse, but I appreciated the gesture nonetheless. I did not respond. There was nothing I wanted to say to Victoria or Marcus or anyone else in Grayson's professional circle. Their opinions of me had been based on lies he told them, and I had no interest in correcting those impressions now. They were welcome to believe whatever they wanted. It no longer affected my life. By the third week after the summit, Connor reported that the firm had made their decision. Grayson was being removed from the partnership. The official statement cited violations of company policy and breach of professional ethics standards. His equity stake would be bought out according to the terms in his partnership agreement, but he was no longer welcome at the firm. His LinkedIn profile is fascinating right now, Connor mentioned during one of our calls. He's trying to spin it as pursuing new opportunities and embracing change. All these posts about growth and learning from challenges. But everyone in the industry knows what actually happened. I pulled up Grayson's LinkedIn profile out of curiosity. There it was, exactly as Connor described. A recent post about exciting new chapters and the importance of resilience in the face of adversity. The comments were sparse and carefully neutral, the kind of responses people leave when they know the real story but do not want to engage publicly with the fiction being presented. I closed the browser and returned to my own work. I had been rebuilding my client relationships over the past few weeks, reaching out to contacts I had neglected while I was focused on supporting Grayson's career. The response had been overwhelmingly positive. People remembered my work, valued my perspective, and were interested in collaborating again. My phone rang that evening. An unknown number which I normally would not have answered, but something made me pick up. "Is this Autumn?" A woman's voice, uncertain and hesitant. "Yes." "Who is this?" "This is Rebecca Thornton." Pause. "I know this is probably the last call you expected. I just wanted to say I'm sorry. I had no idea he was married. If I had known, I never would have pursued a relationship with him. I sat down slowly, surprised by the call and unsure how I felt about it. You don't owe me an apology, I said finally. You were lied to just like I was. I feel like I should have known, Rebecca said, and her voice carried genuine distress. There were signs I ignored. Times he was unavailable without explanation. The way he never invited me to his apartment. I told myself it was because he valued privacy, but maybe I just didn't want to see what was obvious. We talked for 20 minutes. Not friends exactly, but two people who had been manipulated by the same person and were trying to make sense of how thoroughly they had been deceived. When we hung up, I felt something shift. The situation was no longer about revenge or vindication. It was simply about truth replacing fiction, and everyone involved dealing with the consequences of choices they had made or choices that had been made for them. After my conversation with Rebecca ended, I sat for a long time in the quiet of my apartment, processing the unexpected connection I had just experienced. Two women who had been lied to by the same man, finding common ground in the wreckage of his deceptions. It felt like closure I had not known I needed. The following weeks brought a rhythm I had not experienced in years. Mornings began with coffee at my window, watching the neighborhood wake up without the underlying tension of wondering what mood Grayson would be in or what criticism he might have about my plans for the day. I worked on design projects that excited me, reaching out to nonprofits and small businesses that aligned with my values rather than chasing higher-paying clients to match some arbitrary standard of success. Maya came over one Saturday morning with paint samples and fabric swatches. "We're finishing what you started," she announced, spreading samples across my kitchen counter. "This apartment is going to actually reflect who you are, not who someone else wanted you to be." We spent that weekend completing the transformation. The remaining gray walls received coats of warm color that made each room feel inviting. I replaced Grayson's angular coffee table with a vintage wooden piece I found at an estate sale, something with character and history rather than sterile perfection. The uncomfortable chair he had chosen for aesthetics was donated, replaced by an overstuffed reading chair I discovered at a second-hand furniture store. It was exactly the kind of piece Grayson would have mocked as unsophisticated, which made me love it even more. Maya helped me hang the painting I had created years ago, a vibrant abstract piece full of color and movement that I had hidden away when Grayson dismissed it as too personal for display. We positioned it prominently in the living room where his most expensive art piece had once hung. "Your home should make you happy," Maya said as we stepped back to admire the result. "Not impress people who do not matter and probably will not visit anyway." He was right. The apartment finally felt like mine again. Imperfect, eclectic, comfortable. A space where I could relax rather than maintain appearances. 4 weeks after Grayson's departure, Maya convinced me to attend a design conference in Brooklyn. I had been avoiding professional events, worried about encountering people from his network or fielding questions about our separation. But Maya was insistent. "You cannot hide forever," she said. "You have valuable expertise to share, and the design community is not the same as his venture capital world. These are your people." The conference was held at a converted warehouse space in Williamsburg, the kind of venue that prioritized function and creativity over exclusivity. I presented on a panel about branding strategies for nonprofit organizations, discussing how design could communicate mission and values rather than just selling products. The conversation energized me in ways I had forgotten were possible, reminding me why I had chosen this career in the first place. After the panel, a man approached me as I was gathering my materials. He was perhaps a few years older than me, with an easy smile and professional but unpretentious appearance. "Your perspective on purpose-driven design was refreshing," he said, extending his hand. "Julian Prasad. I'm an architect, mostly working on community projects and affordable housing. Too many people in this industry think success is only measured in profit margins or awards from fancy magazines." We started talking about design philosophy and somehow 3 hours passed without me noticing. The conversation flowed naturally from professional topics to personal interests. Books we had read recently. Music that had shaped our creative thinking. The inexplicable phenomenon of people who refuse to use turn signals. The half-serious conspiracy theory that pigeons are government surveillance devices. Julian made me laugh in ways I had forgotten were possible. Not performative laughter designed to make someone else feel clever, but genuine amusement at observations that were actually funny. He asked questions about my work that demonstrated real interest rather than polite networking. He treated our conversation like an exchange between equals rather than an opportunity to establish dominance or demonstrate superior knowledge. When the conference venue began closing down around us, Julian asked if I would be interested in continuing the conversation over coffee sometime. I hesitated. The rational part of my brain recognized this as a simple invitation with no obligations attached. But the wounded part, still processing betrayal and lies, worried about opening myself to potential hurt again. I would like that, I heard myself say, surprising both of us slightly. But I should mention that I recently ended a marriage and I am not looking for anything complicated right now. Julian's expression remained warm and understanding. Coffee is not complicated. Just two people talking. No expectations beyond that. We met the following Thursday at a cafe in Park Slope, neutral territory where I felt comfortable and in control. I arrived early, claimed a table near the window, and reminded myself that I could leave whenever I wanted. This was not a performance or a test. Just coffee with someone who seemed interesting. Julian arrived exactly on time, carrying a worn leather bag that looked like it had been through years of use. We talked for 2 hours about everything and nothing. He described his current project, renovating a community center in Queens to make it more accessible and functional. I shared details about a branding campaign I was developing for a women's shelter. The conversation never felt forced or stilted. He did not ask intrusive questions about my divorce or treat me like someone who needed careful handling. He simply engaged with me as a person who had valuable perspectives to share. Over the following weeks we met regularly. Coffee became dinner. Dinner became long walks through Brooklyn neighborhoods where Julian would point out architectural details I had never noticed, explaining the history and purpose behind design choices. He showed me buildings he had worked on, community spaces that prioritized function and accessibility over showiness. I found myself relaxing in ways I had not experienced in years, laughing more freely, sharing opinions without worrying they would be dismissed. Remembering the person I had been before Grayson convinced me I was not enough. One evening, as we walked through Prospect Park, Julian asked about my design philosophy. Not in the performative way people ask at networking events, but with genuine curiosity about what motivated my work. I think design should serve people rather than impress them, I said, articulating something I had always felt but rarely expressed. The best branding helps organizations communicate their actual mission, not construct some fictional version of themselves that looks good in presentations. Julian stopped walking and looked at me with an expression I could not quite interpret. That is exactly why your panel discussion caught my attention. You were talking about authenticity in a room full of people discussing market positioning and competitive advantage. It was refreshing. 2 months after my separation from Grayson, Connor sent me a screenshot with a brief message. "You have to see this." I opened the image to find Grayson's latest LinkedIn post. It was exactly the kind of performative reflection I had come to expect. Something about embracing new chapters and learning from challenges. Carefully crafted corporate language designed to reframe his professional collapse as intentional personal growth. The post discussed resilience and adaptation without ever acknowledging the ethics violations or lies that had actually caused his departure from the firm. I showed the screenshot to Julian during our next coffee meeting. He read it carefully, then looked up with barely contained amusement. Translation, he said. I destroyed my marriage and career through arrogance and dishonesty, and now I am attempting to spin the consequences as intentional evolution. I laughed, genuinely and without bitterness. Looking at Grayson's carefully constructed fiction, I realized something had shifted fundamentally inside me. I did not hate him. I did not wish for his continued suffering or hope for additional consequences to rain down on him. I simply did not care. He had become irrelevant to my life, a cautionary example of what happens when you build everything on false foundations. My revenge, if it could even be called that, had never been about destroying him. It had been about removing myself from his toxic narrative and allowing natural consequences to unfold. I had stopped protecting him from his own choices, stopped enabling the lies that made his double life possible. Everything that followed had been the inevitable result of truth replacing fiction. When people asked if I would ever consider reconciling with Grayson, a question that came up surprisingly often in the curious way people have about failed marriages, I would smile and repeat the words I had spoken at the Ashford Society that night that felt like a lifetime ago. Do not worry, you will not have to. Because I had found something better than the life I had lost. Not better in the superficial ways Grayson had valued, the exclusive clubs and impressive job titles and expensive furniture. Better in the ways that actually mattered. Peace in my own space. Self-respect that did not depend on someone else's validation. Genuine connections with people like Maya and Connor and Julian who valued me for who I actually was rather than who they needed me to be. I had learned that being underestimated was not a weakness but a foundation for the most meaningful kind of victory. The quiet kind that does not need public recognition. The kind that comes from looking in the mirror and respecting the person looking back. Standing in my apartment one Sunday morning, coffee in hand, surrounded by my concert posters and comfortable furniture and books organized in a way that made sense to me, I realized I had everything that actually mattered. Not wealth measured in investment portfolios or social status measured in exclusive memberships. Wealth measured in authentic relationships and self-knowledge and the freedom to build a life that reflected my actual values. Grayson could keep his LinkedIn posts and his carefully managed image and whatever new fiction he was constructing about his life. I had something infinitely more valuable. I had the truth and I had myself back. If this story of justice and self-discovery kept you captivated until the very end, show your support by hitting that like button right now. My favorite part was when Autumn calmly slid her phone across the table at Café Renoir, watching Grayson's confidence completely shatter. What was your favorite moment in this journey? Share your thoughts in the comments below. Want more powerful stories about reclaiming your life and finding real strength? Subscribe and turn on that notification bell so you never miss another upload.